Okay, so it is our great honor to welcome Professor Sagiri Kitao as a keynote speaker for the Japan Update 2025. Actually, Shiro and I have been inviting her to join this event for nearly a decade. And finally, this year, she has graciously made time in her super busy schedule to be here. And despite arriving late at night yesterday and leaving early in the morning tomorrow, she has prioritized being here. So we are really, really grateful for her presence today. Well, but not yet, I'm sorry. Let me speak. I like talk, I'm sorry. And Sagiri is truly, I cannot emphasize more, truly an outstanding scholar in macroeconomics. Sagiri earned a PhD from New York University under the supervision of Thomas Sargent, who won the Nobel Prize in 2011. She started her academic career at the University of Southern California, then worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and followed by the professorship at the Keio University, where I had the privilege to be a colleague with her. But she left soon, and she joined the University of Tokyo. And recently, she joined the National Graduate Institute for the Policy Studies. Her contribution to economics is immense. One paper published in American Economic Review has more than 1,000 citations, which is quite a rare achievement in the social science. And Sagiri is the recipient of the prestigious Nakahara Award of the Japanese Economic Association, awarded to the Japanese economist under the age of 45 for the recognition of their researches of the international recognitions. I can continue detailing her great achievement for the next 30 minutes or 40 minutes, but I know this is not what you want, so that you must eager to listen to her talk. So without further ado, please join me warmly welcoming Professor Sagiri Kitao as a keynote speaker.
Okay, Ippei, thank you so much for the great introduction. I feel so humbled, and I'm very, very happy to be back here. I visited the economics department a couple of times, and I love people here. And I also enjoyed the nature this morning. I went for a run along the lake for 10K, and it was beautiful. So I'd like to come back, and this is thank you so much for coming here. So today I'm going to talk about the Japanese economy and the demographics especially. So as you probably know, there has been a big shift in terms of the family formation, and then also how household members allocate their time within the household, especially women over the last 50 decades. So as you know, there has been a secular decline in fertility rate and also marriage rates. And if you look at how people allocate their time, there has been a big reduction in the work hours, not just in the market, but also within the household. And then instead, people are spending more time on leisure and childcare, although there has been a decline in the number of children. And we make decisions within the family, whether to get married, how to allocate our time and how many kids to have. Not just talking to each other within the household, but we look at what's going on outside of the family. So we look at how our wages are changing, how the cost of raising children are changing. All these macro factors are influencing how people make decisions within the family. So it's important when you think about what to do about this low fertility rate and low marriage rate. We have to take into account what's going on at the macro level as well. So, and as you know, Japan has faced a big stagnation over the past decades, but there has been some technological growth. And it's not just the neutral technological growth that increased the wage of everyone. So there has been some, so-called skill-biased technological change that will favor, the labor supply provided by the high-skilled workers. And then if you also look at the wage change of women and men, they didn't go up. They didn't move in the same way. So there has been an industrial shift that favors more women, and there has been a change in the law and increase in the opportunity. So the wage structure across genders or across skills changed dramatically. So that also influences who's going to go out and work, and then how to raise their kids, and so on. And then not just what's going on at the market level, but we use a lot of technology within the household, right? So instead of washing clothes by hands, you can just throw everything into the washing machine and then press the button, and you can do the same for the cleaning machine. So that's something that we take as granted now, but that was not the case maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago. So all these changes and technological changes that's happening at home and in the market are influencing how we make decisions about our family and then how to allocate our time. So when you think about the demographic issues and what to do with the fertility, we tend to just ask people why you're not having enough children, but all these factors are influencing each other. And it's not something that's new, but all these changes have happened over the long time. So when you think about policies to deal with this demographic change, we have to take into account all these factors. So by the end of the talk, I'm going to give you the magical solutions for the fertility rate. I'm not going to do that. What I'm going to say is that it's a difficult issue. It's a very complicated issue, and you cannot expect to have a magical solution because it's something that happened over the long period of time. And I just want to present a view to consider many different factors that influence each other in one unified framework. So this talk is going to be based on my work with my co-author, Kanato Nakakuni, who's a graduate from University of Tokyo and now at the postdoc at the University of Mannheim. And what we do is to build a unified framework. All these factors are going to be, sort of put together in one framework, and then think about, how people decide on family formation and the time allocations, taking into account what's going on outside of our home and also the macroeconomy. By the way, I'm a macroeconomist, so I'm interested in the macro phenomena. But I realized that, what we decide within the family will really influence what happens at the macro level as well. And then, of course, macro phenomena, changes in the wage structure, the price of the education, that influences our decisions. So it's really important to think about the micro decisions and the macro phenomena together. And then once we build a model, we're going to think about how technological change or the change in the cost of the child care might influence our decision within this unified framework so that we can get some implication about the policy change or what we might expect going forward as the technological development evolves over time. So let me show you some data, a lot of data that I'm going to throw into a model. And first, this is the fertility rate, probably the familiar picture if you know about the Japanese demographics. So I'm basically going to focus on what happened over the last half century, 50 years, between 1970 and 2020. And the fertility rate declined from above 2 to 1.2, and then there was some pickup, but then it's going down again. And the picture on the right shows the fraction of the never married individuals, men and women, at the age of 50. So it increased from less than 5% to almost 30% for men and 20% for women. So back in 1970s, it was just a common thing that when time comes, you get married and then have 2 kids and keep on working. That was something that everybody did. But now it's different. People are making decisions. And why do we have so few, the fertility is so low? One reason is that the cost of raising children, it has been increasing. So this picture shows the college tuition, which increased dramatically over the last 50 years. And then typically in economics, if the price is high, then you don't want to buy that, right? But that didn't happen. So if you look at the college enrollment rate, that increased dramatically also, especially for women. Back in 1970, only 7% of women went to college, but now it's more than 50% and converging to that of men. So the average cost of raising children has increased quite a bit. And let's look at the time allocation of household members. So I'm just showing here the average time use of married men and women aged between 25 and 59. So I take away the time for sleep and eating and then allocate the disposable time into 4 different activities: market work, housework, childcare, and leisure. And each column sum up to 100. So back in 1970s, women allocated about 37% of their disposable time for market work, 38% to housework. But both of these numbers declined sharply over the last 40, 50 years. It went down to 30% and 32%. And then instead, they spent more time on childcare. That increased from 7% to 14%. And this increase happened when the number of children declined sharply. So if you look at the time that the parents spend on each child, it increased even more dramatically, from 3% to almost 9%. So somehow, over the last half century, we have to spend a lot more time on children. That's something that's so intuitive to me. When I was a kid, I just went to the park by myself and then, just spend time with my friends. But now, I can't do that. You have to take your kids to, different activities and spend a lot more time. So that's the kind of the change that we have seen over the last 50 years. And I think that's the same in other countries as well. And women also spend more time on leisure. And let's look at men. There's not much action. There's some reduction in the market work and increase in leisure, and they are doing more work at home, but a little bit. So basically, when I go to the model, I'm gonna be focusing on how women's behavior changed. But I'm not saying that men are not important. They are going to be important, but in explaining what happened over the last 50 years, they were not so important in terms of housework, sadly. And I talked about our home, production technology, and this picture shows the price of the tools that we use every day, like price of the fridge, microwave, washing machine. All of these, the prices declined sharply over the last 50 years. And technology became more readily available at home. And if you compare the price change with that of food and housing in the picture on the right, you can see the dramatic difference between these, the time series. And in terms of the wage structure, as I said, the wage growth has not been that dramatic, but the wages have been growing for everyone. But if you look at the composition of the wage structure by skill type and the gender, they experienced quite a different wage growth. So women, on average, experienced a wage growth of 1.4%, and the men 0.9%. It's not a big change, but accumulating over 50 years, it's going to be a big difference. And then there has been also a difference in the wage growth between the skill types as well. So you can compute based on this some interesting statistics like a gender wage gap, which is just the ratio of women's wage to men's wage. So if this is 1, then the wages are perfectly equal. So back in 1970, this gender wage gap was 0.5. So women's wage was just 50% of the men's. And it increased to 0.64. So there is some shrinkage of the wage gap, but still there's a big wage gap. And in terms of the skill premium, if you just take the ratio of the high skill wage, high skill means the college and above, and the low skill means the high school and below, the wage premium skill premium is not that big, 1.46, and it has not changed that much. So it's very different from the big skill premium and the huge increase as observed in the US, for example. But it doesn't mean that there was no skill bias technological change, because there was a big change in the supply. Right? If there's a lot of supply, then the price tends to be lower. But the price didn't really change. That doesn't mean that the skill bias technological change did not happen, because the worker composition, as we saw in the the picture of the education, changed dramatically at the same time. So if you look at the worker distribution, this is just a number of workers by skill and gender. Women's share increased dramatically from 30% to 46%, and then that increase almost entirely comes from the increase in the high-skilled women. And men's skill composition also changed, but that was not as big as women's change. So all these the facts are very interesting, but they really interact with each other, as I mentioned. So what I'm going to do is that I'm going to throw everything into the model and then do the analysis and then show you lots of equations, derivatives. I'm not going to do that, so don't worry. I'm just going to, but I just have to tell you, what I do, and then I'm going to try to give a, intuitive explanation. I'm not as good as Sugiyama-san to be entertaining, but I'll do my best. So this is going to be the simulation-based analysis. So there will be lots of people interacting with each other, and then I try to build a model so that people in my model are going to behave as if they do in the data. And then there will be the firms that are producing output, and there will be the market where the wage rates are determined based on the skill development and then also the number of the workers available. And then I parameterize the model, give that nice way to equation to represent people's behavior, and then make sure that my model explained what happened over the last 50 years. And then I can do some simulations. So that's what I do in my daily life as a macroeconomist. So I first build a box where there are lots of people living there. So that's called the household sector. So this is where individuals are making decisions about marriage. So I let the people meet each other, and then there will be some good match, bad match, and then they decide whether to get married or not. And then looking at thinking about what's going on at the macro level, they decide how many kids to have and what to consume, and then how to allocate their time. And in terms of the time, as we saw in the data, I let them allocate their time to market work, home production, leisure, and childcare, just for couples. And then, they also take into account the opportunity cost. Without spending so much time at home, they could go to the market, and then they can enjoy the wage rate. So if the wage rate is increasing for me, then maybe I want to spend more time in the market, and then not to have kids, and so on. And then this model is going to be populated by single men, single women, and married couples. And then there will be another box where I put a lot of firms that produce output using the labor supplied by the families, and they can also use the technology. And And then once I build a model, I can run many counterfactual experiments. So this is what happened in the data. The wage rate increased like this, technology changed like this, childcare cost increased like this. But now let's hypothetically assume that the childcare cost didn't increase that much, then what people would have done. So I'm going to that kind of counterfactual experiment that hopefully will give us some implications about the future policy. So in terms of just some small details about the model, so in terms of the fertility choice, there will be a good thing and a bad thing about having kids. So what's the cost? So you have to pay burden. So there will be some basic childcare costs no matter what you decide to do about the kids. So if you have kids, you have to spend some time, and that time cost has changed over time as we saw in the data. And then there's some basic cost, money, that financial cost that you have to pay. So there will be the time cost and the financial cost, no choice once you have kids. And then on top of that, you can decide whether you want to educate your child to advance to the college or not, taking into account your salary and also the benefit of doing that. Okay? And then that's the cost, but you still want to do that because you have some benefits. So here I'm just going to build on the longer classic work of so-called the quantity and the quality theory of children. So people get utility from having kids around. So that's the quantity part. And then people are also going to be happy if you have good kids. So that's the quality part. So you have some incentive to educate your kids, maybe coming from the money that they would earn that you can maybe extract a little bit from, or maybe you're just going to be happy, very altruistic. So you don't know, but people seem to like the high quality kids. So there will be some trade-off. But of course, our resources are limited. So you can't have the perfect children, 10 kids. You can't do that. So you face some trade-off, right? So Okay, so in terms of the quality, I also put some elements that interact with the macro phenomena. So if I educate my kids and advance to a good college, then I know that he's going to earn, some skill premium based on the, the market wage difference between the college graduates and the high school. And if that difference is going to be huge, maybe I will start to have some more incentive to educate my son and then give up having the second child. So that kind of trade-off is incorporated in here. So this is the channel through which what's going on at the macroeconomic level will influence the decision at the micro level. And I also have the marriage decision. So I let people meet with someone, and then there will be some, the match quality to be realized. And if you get married in this model, you can enjoy having kids, and you can enjoy quantity and quality. So this is the model of Japan, and it's very unusual to have children outside of the wedlock in Japan. It's increasing, but it's not like in the US or Europe. So you need to get married in order to have kids. Things are changing, but that's the assumption that I make. And then instead of having two big tables, you can just have one table and enjoy the scale economy, so-called. So that's also one benefit of marriage. And then if you're a woman or if your income is low, then by getting married, you could have a higher household income and more consumption. Those are the benefits. Okay, so people in the box choose to get married if the value of the marriage exceeds the value of the single. And yeah, oops. Okay. So these are some elements, and I'm going to parameterize the model so that we can approximate the economies over the last 50 years, the data that we saw. Okay. And individuals are going to make decisions, taking as given the change in the cost of the child care, the college cost, or the time that we have to spend to take care of our kids. And those are something that you take as given. And then also wages are going to be taken as given, right? So you can't really influence the market wage. So that's something that you take as given. But that will be determined within the model in the box of the firms. Okay, so just to show you how this, the model that we spent a month to build performs in terms of matching the data. So this is the change in the allocation of time of married women that we saw in the table. So market work, housework declined, so the dots are the data, and then the straight lines are what we generate in the model. So there has been some increase in the leisure and the childcare. So you can be assured that my model, approximates the real economy quite well. And then this is the picture of the fertility rate and schooling. This is the college entry and the marriage rate. So I built a model so that things are going to go smoothly. So what I want to do is to, capture the big trend that we saw over the 5 decades. So my lines are straight, but we approximate the behavior of the data quite well so that we can use this model to think about what happens in the future or under the hypothetical experiment. So what I'm going to do is now I will have the model and then see what's the effect of the changes that we observed over the last 50 years. So there was the general increase in the well-being. That's called the general technological growth, call it a TFP, total factor productivity, if you have heard about it. And the second one is about the skill bias technological change, the kind of the technological development that favors the high-skilled workers with college degree. And then there was also the change that favors the women's labor supply. So I'm not going to make a stance about what really accounts for this change. There was a big change in the law about the women's work opportunities in 1980s, and there has been a shift in the industrial structure. There was a surge in the medical or the long-term care sectors that tend to favor the labor supply of women. So all these factors are going to behind this change. But just looking at the wage difference in the wage growth between men and the women, there must be some the technological change that favor women's labor supply. So that's this third one, gender biased technological change. And then the last one is about the home production technology, right? Increasing the productivity of the housework. So if you kill those technological development that actually happened, then what would have happened in the economy? That's what I want to show. So here, I'm first focusing on the gender-specific technology that favors women's labor supply and the increased women's wage. And this blue line in each picture represents the baseline economy that actually happened. And then I'm going to shut down the technology that enhance women's productivity and then see what happens. So if there was no, women's technological advancement that leads to the higher wage of women, then, if my wage is low, then I have fewer incentive to work. So the work hours compared to the baseline would be lower. And then instead, the leisure would be higher. So what happens at the macro level, the difference in the wage rate between men and women, of course, will influence the work incentive and the leisure, so that we saw in the data. And then in terms of the family formation, so if we didn't have the increase in women's wage rate, roughly speaking, then the marriage rate, for example, the picture on the left, would be much higher. So, increasing the work opportunity and the improvement of the relative wage of women to men really encouraged people to, not to get married. So without that, then the marriage rate would not have declined that much. And in terms of the fertility rate, so if women's wage is lower, then the opportunity cost of taking care of kids or staying at home would be lower. So you might expect that the fertility rate would be much higher. And then fertility is actually higher, but not that much. But household income is going to be much lower as well because women's wage is not increasing, so they cannot really afford to have as many kids. So these effects are going to offset each other, and then it turns out that fertility rate may not be that different without women's wage increase. And in terms of the schooling, household income is going to be lower, so they can afford to have fewer education, so the schooling would be much lower compared to the baseline. So that's the kind of the prediction about the effect of the women's wage rate. And the general, this is TFP, total factor productivity, skill bias technological change. This is the general wage increase for both men and women. Without this, the work hours would be much higher. We saw a huge reduction in the work hours, but that would not have happened. And instead, the leisure would be much lower. So people becoming much richer and the wage is higher, that really contributed to the increase in the decrease in the work hours and the leisure. And in terms of the family formation, so the marriage rate also would have been higher without the technological advancement in general, and the fertility rate would not have changed that much. So again, here there's two effects offsetting each other. So if your wage is really high in the market, you're more productive in the market, then your time is so precious, so you don't want to spend much time at home taking care of kids, and you want to go to the market. So that effect is there as well, but your family income is also going to be lower, so you can't afford to have more kids. So these effects are going to offset each other, and then it turns out that the fertility rate is not that high. And in terms of the schooling, skill bias technological change really played a big role in accounting for the increase in the college graduation rate. So you look at how college wage rate is increasing, and that gives incentive to parents to invest more in their kids. In terms of the home production technology, so if there was no advancement in terms of the the washing machine or the cleaning machine, then the housework hours would have stayed high, and then that would lead to the the lower work hours and the leisure. So that's the effect of the technology. So let's look at the childcare cost. So remember, there are 3 different childcare costs in the model. So you have to spend a lot more time now to take care of kids, and then you have to pay some basic childcare, and that's also increased. And then there was an increase in the college cost. So let's see what if this increase was not that big. So let's cut the increase that we observed in the data by half. So it's a big simulation change. Then what would have happened? So if you ask people, the government is so worried about the fertility, so they keep asking people what's preventing them from having the ideal number of kids. And then one of the top answers always is the high cost of education. So what's going to happen if we cut it, right? So here, let's look at the middle, the total fertility rate compared to the baseline in blue. Fertility rate would be higher, although the effects are very mixed. So the big effect comes from the reduction in the childcare time. So people have to spend a lot more time now, but if that didn't happen, then fertility rate would be much higher. So it's not just about the time, but the opportunity cost of each hour has been changing over time. That increased really dramatically, especially for women. So these effects are going to lead to big reduction in the total fertility rate. But if you look at the education cost, that's really interesting. So lots of people complain that college costs are too much, and that's why I'm not having more kids. But the fertility rate effect is really small. Instead, people are spending more resources on the schooling. So what happens is that if the price of the education is low, then what you want to do is, if it's cheap, then you want to buy more. So instead of having more kids, maybe you want to spend more on the quality part. So there's some shift from quantity to quality. So the government, if they provide more subsidy to maybe the cram school that people, especially in the metropolitan area, are so crazy about, or maybe provide more subsidy for the college, that doesn't really guarantee that people would like to have more kids. Maybe totally opposite thing can happen. They're going to be more crazy about investing in kids, but instead let's have fewer kids, high quality kids. So that's something that we found it interesting. So that's it, and so I hope, sorry I didn't give you any a magical solution, but I hope I could convince you that it's important to take into account many things when you think about the demographic issues in the policy. Thank you.
Presentation. So that it is really fortunate to have a great discussant for her paper. So Dr. Elena Capatina at the Research School of Economics here at the ANU. She's another very prominent macroeconomist. So Elena, please.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a great pleasure to discuss Professor Sagiri Kitao's work. I'm a great admirer of her work. Professor Kitao's research is at the frontier of macroeconomics that is micro-founded, looking at the decisions over the life cycle of individuals in terms of fertility, labor supply, marital decisions, and investment in children. So this paper is no exception. It pushes the boundaries of what we understand from previous literature, building significantly, and giving us a much more comprehensive model compared to the existing literature to understand the various interactions between decisions and technology. So the big question is, why have marriage and fertility rates fallen so sharply in Japan, and how can we reconcile these trends with rising educational attainment and shifts in time allocation? The model links technology both at home and in the market with educational choices, family formation, and women's time allocation in a general equilibrium framework. So it models multiple forms of technological change: neutral, skill-biased, and gender-biased. This comprehensive modeling of intra-household decisions is really important. And not only, this is a new theoretical model that is much, much richer. So in this research, it's been calibrated to Japan, but in future research, one could take this model and apply it to other countries. In Professor Kitao's work, they look at South Korea, but so many countries are going through this demographic transition that it has potential to enrich our understanding in many other settings as well. So the key mechanisms in the model are that female-biased technological progress has led to higher wages for women, rising opportunity costs of childcare, which implies fewer marriages and children. Home production technology, such as appliances and automation, has led to less time on chores, freeing women's time for market work. And importantly, also, rising childcare costs have led to a shift toward fewer but higher educated children. So there's a quantity-quality trade-off. On the other hand, rising education costs have the opposite effect. Now, these mechanisms may seem straightforward, but in fact they're not, because of the various interactions within the model. And that's why I want to highlight the importance of building this unified framework and the fact that household choices are interconnected, and this framework really enables us to match the data and understand the patterns much better. So as two examples here illustrate, so for one is if education is fixed exogenously, so if we refrain from modeling the investment of parents in their kids' education, in that setting, rising female wages would simply boost income, and the model will deliver that they would just have more children. And this would be counterfactual. However, with endogenous schooling, parents invest more in education and have fewer children. So this model enables us to match the patterns we see. Another example is that if time allocation is fixed, income is overstated. So what would happen is that higher wages would increase incomes, and fertility would be higher because of an income effect. However, in fact, we see that women's leisure has increased, and for married women, they work fewer hours, actually. So endogenizing women's leisure and work decision yields very different outcomes. Okay, so these things are important because once we look at policy, it's important that we take into account everything to get the right predictions. So, for example, a childcare subsidy or an education reform doesn't just change the cost, but it shapes everything: fertility, labor supply, and marriage dynamics. And so this unified modeling is vital because technological change is entangled so much with women's work, educational investment, and family decisions. Now, I want to say a little bit about the cost of childcare. So, in the model, the growing time and financial costs associated with basic childcare drive some of the key results. And they're one of the main reasons why fertility and marriage have declined. So, financial costs increased by 53% from 1970 to 2020, and the time costs, both men plus women, have more than tripled. So what explains their growth? Well, we could view these costs as endogenously determined and linked to the quality of children parents desire. So we know from the paper that nowadays, one result is that parents want higher quality children and prefer to have fewer children in order to enable this. This can also explain the rising costs of basic childcare. Many childcare costs today are no longer basic, but investments in human capital that raise future expected skills and the probability of entering college, for example. So a famous paper by Kuna and Heckman in the AAR look at how childhood is not a single period, but there are several key stages of development. And investing, say, in early childhood then enables a lot of skill formation at sensitive or critical periods that then have implications for further development. So skills produced at one stage augment the skills attained at later stages, so we can think about dynamic complementarities and self-productivity of investing in children's skills early on. If we give them emotional skills, they'll be better able to pick up cognitive skills later on. So this can help us understand why the childcare costs have increased over time and give us a better idea of the deep fundamental reasons for the trends. Also, we know that higher educated parents spend more time with their children. So there is research that shows in the US, people who are better educated spend more time with their kids. And also if we look across countries and so across countries with higher GDP per capita, they spend more time with their children, and within a diverse set of countries, there is this educational gradient for time spent on childcare. So why is this? Because you would think that higher educated parents have a higher opportunity cost of kids, so you would expect them to spend less time. Well, there are many hypotheses. So childcare could behave as a luxury good in household spending. Educated parents may prefer their own time with children over outsourcing care because they're better able to increase their children's human capital themselves. And there may be higher returns to investment in children of educated parents. So all of these could also enter into Japan's experience, where we see an increase in the educational attainment of especially women over time. And at the same time, we see that especially women spend more time with their children over time. It's interesting for me to think about education, university education and cohort constraints. So we know in Japan, competition for university spots is fierce, and this implies the need for large parental investment starting from early on. However, with the demographic change, it's projected that the cohort size would decrease of university-aged youths, and universities are already lowering admission thresholds. So it's going to be interesting how this, what this implies for parental investment in children, especially early on. It's possible that a more efficient allocation of parental time and resources could emerge out of this if they don't need to push their kids to compete for various test scores that don't raise human capital, but are just used as a signal to universities. Okay, I also want to talk a little bit about technological innovation and adoption. In the model is taken as exogenous, and this is standard in literature. In this kind of strand of literature, nobody endogenizes technology and adoption. However, I just want to point out that research has shown that we witness what's called directed endogenous technological change, where aging actually leads to greater automation in particular industries. So firms invest in automation when, for example, middle-aged workers prime for many industrial jobs become scarce. And there's cross-country evidence that higher old to middle age ratios correlate with greater robot use and robotics and R&D. So it's interesting to think about this in the context of this paper, where Japan's aging could itself accelerate robotics adoption, changing both the labor and the skill demand and family choices. So here in the model, we have various technological change happening, skill bias, gender bias, etc. This affects family choices and labor supply decisions, but it could go the other way around, where changing demographics and labor supply could affect technological innovation and adoption as well. And this actually is a good thing for Japan. A lot of people worry that aging societies will be slowing down in terms of innovation. However, research has shown that because aging societies adopt technologies faster, actually there's no correlation between aging and economic growth. So this is a positive for Japan. Also, just quickly, there is a huge potential for allocating talent more efficiently with large implications for growth. So in the growth literature, again, misallocation of talent by gender and race in the US fell sharply, and this reallocation explains 20 to 40% of US growth. So huge potential to use female labor supply and now lots of educated women to increase growth in the future. Other considerations, I just want to point out for long-term care costs, we know that long-term care costs are expected to increase in Japan with the declining marriage rates and fewer children. This is a potential concern because of a decline in informal care from spouses and children and a greater reliance on formal long-term care, which is very expensive. And in the context of this model, it would be very interesting to think about AI and the next wave of gender-biased technology. So it will be interesting how it plays out, whether it complements or substitutes versus, various types of labor, and whether it matters for fertility and labor allocation. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you so much. You made me feel like writing 4 more different papers on the topics that you mentioned. Yeah. So yeah, lots of comments. Thank you so much. And yeah, so in my model, I look at the data and then I saw people spending a lot more time on childcare and then take it as something that parents would have to do. But people are choosing to spend more time and spend more money on the basic childcare, not just the college, because of the high skill premium that we see. So thinking about why is really, I think, important, and the next step that I want to do. There's some social pressure and some exogenous component. I just can't let my small children go to school by themselves. So some factors are totally exogenous, but people are making decisions, and maybe society is changing, and then thinking about the fundamental forces behind this, I think it's really important. And also, in terms of the university education, so because the number of children is declining, a lot of colleges are actually shutting down because they cannot attract the students. So simply sending your kids to college, it's not that difficult as long as you have enough money. But people are really getting crazy about sending their kids to good schools that they like. So we need to go a little bit further and look at why sending my children to ANU instead of some other school in different region makes my life different, make my kids' life different. Maybe look at the wage differential based on the the college majors or the college differences, taking into account. That will be really the next step that I would have to do. And in terms of the interaction between technology and what people do, I mean, I didn't think about it, but it's so important. I mean, we need more technology to save my time at home, and then that gives a lot of pressure to maybe the electrical company or appliance company. So that will be an interesting step, that I would consider. Thank you so much.
Okay, so that this is really a great opportunity to have 2 prominent scholars in the macroeconomics and the family formation. We tend to think that aging is like an exogenous phenomenon, but the declining fertility rate is not a exogenous event. There are so many interconnectedness among the forces behind that. So that this is a great opportunity, and to be honest, we are behind the schedule, but we are so used to it as usual. So I'm happy to have several questions and comments. This is really important issue. So if you have any question, then please raise your hand. Okay, could you go first? Yeah, then next you. Yeah, 1, 2. And are you? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Also, we are used to be behind the schedule, but please be concise.
This is a personal opinion, not professional. And anyway, so I'm not sure whether the RK selection theory, RK Sentaku Setsu, is still an applied theory used in sociology, which is one of quantity versus quality of any sort of organic system. So not just humans, but animals and plants, and it's of the macro of the macro. Is this huge modeling that is socio and environmental stresses increase fertility rates? And if you look at the world, out of developed nations, I think New Zealand is the highest with 1.4 something or whatever, but out of fertility rate nations, it's down to about 150. So how does the luxury, is that we say, of our developed nations by having so much greater developed economies, affect these macro scales of fertility when looking at the RK, which is quantity of quality. So basically, lower socioeconomic, high population, greater socioeconomic value, and then the lower fertility rates. So these are macro things that, I mean, if you want to make a rose flower, you have to stress it. If you want greater fruit from your orchards, you have to stress them. So how does this fit into your modeling? Thank you.
Okay, yeah, so that maybe the next section is, okay, maybe you go first, yeah, then, sorry, next, sorry, yeah, please. Maybe, yeah, let's collect the 3 questions first. Yeah, please.
Right, thank you, that's again. So I have a huge concern for talent flight as well as labor shortage in Japan. So it's really topical that, for example, as you mentioned, declining fertility rate, declining population, but also, like, unlike Australia, where immigrant country, there are mix of people. I myself immigrant. Like, I was born in Japan, Tokyo, but being here in Australia for 15 years. I applied for global talent visa, and most of my friends in Tokyo, especially who are pursuing global career, actually kind of moved to either gaishike in Tokyo, or working overseas like myself. So a lot of very highly talented people is get out from Japan or go to gaishike, foreign owned entities, and then now Japan is a little bit have allergy to receive many immigrants because majority of people living in Japan, let's say 95 or more people are Japanese. And then if you see the news articles last 4 days, JICA had announced kind of hometown concept, receiving some immigrant from Africa, and then but there is kind of movement or anti-immigrant movement here in Australia and as well as Japan. So my questions to Sagiri-san is, could you name few kind of way to tackle those talent flight as well as labor shortage in Japan? Thank you.
Yeah, let's have the final question.
Thank you, Professor Kitao. I read your paper during a seminar in RSA. It's very impressive. My question is that, so in your paper, you mentioned the roles of technology in the changing the time allocation within household. But we're still seeing, so it changes the time allocation mainly on female, but there is still this huge inequality between male and female role in household production. And there's already studies showing that if you have this inequality, that will also impact, so different impact of your, so even you lower the cost of childcare, if you have an inequality allocation of household duty within a household, that would make that policy basically ineffective. And so what is the technology in your mind that will tackle the issue of inequality maybe in the future?
Okay, I think you have a lots of questions
Yeah,
and from lots of angles, and yeah, please.
Thank you so much for the great questions about the quantity and the quality. I mean, economists always try to come up with all the different models and then take it to the data and then see which one beats. So the quantity quality theory is really established theory, and not just because Gary Becker, who got the Nobel Prize, proposed this, but it seems to explain the pattern of the the shift quite well. So that's why we take it. But in terms of the non-linearity, as Elena mentioned, so when people become richer, income goes up, then the number of kids tends to decline. But that's not monotonic in the data. So if you look at the really high-income people, they tend to have more kids and then more quality. So it's not really simple. But I think that's the direction and where the frontier of the research is. So I don't have a the definite answer, but that's definitely what we have to think about. And then in terms of the second question about the labor shortage, I mean, mean, I know I worked at the Gaishike, the foreign company Goldman Sachs, after I graduated from college, and then spent almost 2 decades in the US. So that's my experience. But I need to see more data. The people that we lose, going abroad are really making a lot more money, and how much we are losing. So that's something that I have to verify from the data. But in terms of the labor shortage, I mean, we have already experienced a decline in the total population, and especially the number of the workers. But if you look at the number of employees in Japan since 2000, it's been increasing. So there's a lot of margin to tap, especially women, and a lot of old people are really participating and longer, and they are getting healthier. So I think fertility, in terms of fertility, it's very difficult. I mean, even if we can pick up the fertility a little bit now, it takes 20 years for them to start making contributions in the labor market. So in tackling the labor shortage, I think there are other things that we have to do. And that also goes to the third question about the gender difference. There's a huge the productivity difference between men and women. So that's the big room that the government can exploit. And one thing, I don't have just one solution, but there are lots of policies that the government developed over the last 50 years, especially back in 1970s and 60s, when it was the norm for women to stay at home and just focus on the childcare. So women were always low income, low educated. So the government implemented a lot of policies to help low income dependent women. As long as your income is very low, the government will provide a lot of the tax credit to husband, and then give a lot of exemption from the social insurance premium, and they are still there now. So the purpose of that policy was good intention, but now it's preventing a lot of women from participating, because if your income is above the threshold, then all of a sudden the family have to pay a lot more. So that is I think something that the government can do right away, but it's very, very difficult. The government is very slow. So I don't know, but yeah, there are many things that I think we can do. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the great answers. I know that you must have more questions, but I promise you to give you enough lunchtime. So therefore, please ask the speakers and the discussant over lunchtime. So at the moment, please join me thanking Sagiri and Elena for the fantastic presentation and the discussions. And now we switch to the economy panel chaired by Elena. Yeah, so we're going to join you. Yeah.
All right, so thank you so much. So we're going to switch topics a little bit, but and it's a great pleasure to chair this panel with two of our professors who need no introduction, but just to do the formality. So Professor Shiro Armstrong is a professor of economics at the Crawford School at ANU, and he's a director of the Australia-Japan Research Center, editor of the East Asia Forum, and director of the East Asia Bureau of Economic Research. And Professor Fujiwara is a professor at Keio and now at Tokyo University and ANU. And he's a research fellow at the Center of Economic Policy Research. And many other, I won't list them all, there's too many. But we have two experts in international finance, monetary economics, macroeconomics. So it's very exciting to hear your take on recent events. Please go ahead, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I feel a little bit intimidated after the fantastic presentation, but let me try what I can do. Could you show my slide or? Okay. Oh, yeah. So I would like to start with the big pictures. This is the GDP after 1955. This is in log scale. In a log scale, if it's a straight line, it shows the constant growth. So that actually the Japanese economic developments in the last 70 years are summarized by just 3 lines. Okay, so first one is the high growth era up until 1970. Growth rate is around 9.5%. The reason behind this high growth is the migration from rural to the urban area, and also the capital deepening. Then the medium, growth time up until 1990, growth rate was like 4%. In 1990, Japan's per capita GDP was almost the same level to the United States. So there was a catching up. So we could enjoy the high growth. And after 1990, it's embarrassing, 1%. So we sometimes call it the lost 3 decades. And this maybe a bit less than 1%, I think I'm missing approximate sign, but okay, anyway, less than 1% growth rate has been very persistent for the last 30 years. Sometimes we call this the lost 3 decades, okay? But, this is a little bit digression, so that this 1%, less than 1% of potential growth has been very persistent. So usually the economic forecast about Japan is set between 0.5 and 1%, because 1%, a bit so lower than the 1% productivity growth has been very persistent in Japan. Okay, then this is a related topic to the previous fantastic keynote the presentations. What could be the reason behind the really low growth, 1%? It's natural to have a lower growth rate compared to the 1980s, 4%. But 1% is too low compared to other advanced economies. Then here comes the aging. Okay, so this chart shows, total population started declining around 2010. But all the more importantly, working age population, that is a population between ages 15 to 65, that is denoted by the orange bar, started declining in the late 1990s. Okay, so this has a significant, you can imagine that this has a significant implication for the supply side, because the workers getting smaller, production should be smaller. Okay. And this is the GDP among the advanced economies. And Japan is a thick line, this thick black or navy line. Compared to the other advanced economies, our performance is not so good. But if we measure the performance in a GDP per capita, it's not so bad. Okay. And if we measure the GDP per working age population, it's not bad at all. Okay, so as you can see, the aging has a significant implication for the production side and the supply side of the economy. But this is not the end of the story. Even the per workers, our performance in the recent 20 years was not so bad, but we need to still keep the living standard for those who are out of the labor forces. Okay, what could be the consequence? So very bad fiscal condition, as you know. So red line is the spending by the government, and the orange line is, on the other hand, revenue of the government. And nowadays, some people in Japan say it's like a alligator's mouth. I don't know, maybe alligator is the right word in Australia. We should say crocodile. Somehow I have an image of the crocodile, like due to the crocodile Dundee. So anyway, so maybe it's I don't know what the difference between alligator and the crocodile anyway. So some people say it's the crocodile mouth, and that there's no sign of the closing of the crocodile mouth. And this is definitely reflecting the aging problem. And as a result, this is the debt GDP ratio of Japan compared to other countries. Now it is about 250% of GDP. It's way higher than Greece. It's really worrisome things. And there are so many reasons, but one major reason must be aging. Okay, so this is the healthcare expenditure. Because society is getting older and older, so healthcare expenditure has been increasing. And this is the nursing care expenditures. It's also touched in the previous keynote speeches. It has been also increasing. And if we think about the future, it's really depressing. Okay, so I cannot find any good table and the figures in English, but this is the official figure provided by the Ministry of Finance web pages. What this figure saying is, we are not entering the aging society. We are entering the super aging society. Okay, so baby boomers just became above 75. Okay, population of above 75 increased by 3 million in the last 5 years. Nothing wrong. I'm just talking about the fact. Nothing wrong about aging. Nothing wrong about the longevity. I'm just talking about the facts and kind of end consequences to the macroeconomy. And what I would like to emphasize here is how much increase we should have an increase in the medical cost between 65 and 75. I think a medical cost should be 4 times higher for those above 75 compared to those below 75. And this is a nursing care cost. Nursing care cost will be 10 times higher for those above 75 than those below 75. So we're going to face the very, very tight fiscal condition in a foreseeable future. That's going to be a significant challenge. And so far, we could increase the debt GDP ratio. What enabled such a sustained, steady increase in the government debt? One reason is the lower interest rate. Okay, so even though the debt increased massively, but thanks to the lower interest rate, you see the yellow line, the interest rate, and interest rate payment has not been rising so much. But recently, as somebody you mentioned, I think there's an inflation, and also the interest rate is increasing. There's a jump in interest rate payment is expected, and this is a projection. So I don't know, because this is not my projections. I cannot explain how we get this data, but it's expected there should be a huge increase in government bond interest rate payments. So what I would like to say here is that we may have a very tough time in the next 5 years or 10 years. Okay, so Japanese GDP growth rate has been very low, but if you come to Japan, you may feel like living standards are somehow maintained in Japan. Fiscal policy is not the sole reason, but I believe fiscal policy has something, contributed something to maintain the living standards in Japan. But we are not so sure whether fiscal policy can still contribute to keep the living standards, because expenditure will increase massively, reflecting aging, and also interest rate payment is increasing. Also, there's other issue like the defense spending is increasing, and also this is the vintage of infrastructure. Our infrastructure became older and older. Recently, there was a collapse of the street or something, and somebody died. So that we need to renew the infrastructure. So that we are now facing the lots of demand for the government spending. But we are not quite sure whether we can increase the government for foreseeable future. This must be a huge challenge, and this is something we have been postponing the important decision. So I don't have any magical solution either, but I just want to emphasize this could be a very important issue for foreseeable future. That's all.
All right, thanks Ippei and Elena. Let me follow on with another set of challenges Japan faces, and a bit of a trigger warning here before I shift to President Trump. But this now familiar picture was the Liberation Day announcement of so-called reciprocal tariffs from the United States. I think like many, I was watching this in shock and horror. This was a clear sign of confirmation of US departure from international leadership in international trade and the rules-based economic order, not just to vacate the space, but to become an active threat towards the system and the biggest source of uncertainty. So going back to 2017, before Trump 1 was in power, the average US tariff rate was 1%. It became about 3% after Trump 1.0 because of all the tariffs on Chinese imports. Now it's between 17 and 32% on average. I say between because it changes every day and it depends on what you see is implemented or not, including all the sectoral tariffs. So the announcement was for 24% tariffs on all Japanese goods entering the United States and 25% on sectoral tariffs, that is on Japanese cars entering the US, cars and auto parts. So just to understand how much Japan exports to the United States, about 1/5, 20% of Japan's total exports go to the United States. But more importantly, about 37%, just about 40% of Japanese car exports, one of Japan's biggest export industry, is to the United States. So this 25% tariff on cars, but 24% tariff on all imports would have been pretty damaging to Japanese corporate but economic interests too. A lot of the modelling showed between 0.5% and 1% fall in GDP from the direct effects of these tariffs, but then between 1.5 and 1.8% fall in GDP from all the secondary macro effects and the uncertainty. But I think it's much worse than that potentially because of the uncertainty and because of the threat to the entire rules-based system. I mean, this is not over yet. We've got a bit of a lull and maybe a false truce, but there's more coming. You can guarantee that. We're not even finished a year of the Trump presidency, and much more has been promised, and not to mention all the trade diversion effects, all the contagion risks that we still face. So we're really staring down the big risk of a collapse in the economic rules-based order. In response to this, we, of course, had Minister Akazawa visit Washington 9 times, the first foreign negotiator there, managed to secure a deal for reducing those tariffs from 24% and 25% to 15%. That is extremely high by historical standards, but it's now sort of been normalized. For a while, this consumed all of Japanese policy bandwidth. I think soon after negotiations started, at least Prime Minister Ishiba wrote a letter to President Xi Jinping, Chinese president, to reassure that other economic interests are being considered. But I think this raises a question of what else did Japan give up? What did Japan give up for this, and what are the risks of that? So what Japan gave up, well, not just the golden myaku myaku there on the table, but if this comes up at some stage, an increase in rice quotas, so to buy more American rice, $8 billion worth of American agricultural produce Japan promised to buy, Alaskan gas, more US defense equipment. Basically, this moved this important big relationship from free trade to managed trade. It was already going that way, but that diverts trade from other partners. And it is fundamentally in breach of the principle that underpins our rules-based system of equal treatment. So it's not just Australian gas and agricultural produce. This is fixed in, baked in trade diversion. On top of that, the United States agreed to invest, Japan agreed to invest $550 billion in the United States. Trump thinks he's going to determine where these investments are made, and that the US side says 90% of the profits will go to the United States and Japan can have 10% of the profits. So Minister Akazawa was due in Washington last week to sort this out, but had to delay the trip because of the difficulties in coming to an understanding on how to split this investment, but also because of US demands for Japan to buy more rice. And we all know that's a sacred, sensitive area in Japan. I would suggest it's not the end of the world for Japan to buy more foreign rice. Not just sort of inferior US rice, but of course Australian rice and other rice from Southeast Asia and elsewhere. Because you can see there's been a bit of a jump in the price of rice, 100% increase since last year, and this has been a big social and political challenge in Japan. It's consumed a lot of concern. It was a big election issue too. And the rice price is still very high. Now, I think I'll come back to this, but it's probably important to remember that you're protecting a small group of farmers, so it's a special interest, at the expense of the national interest. Everyone has to pay for more rice. So we'll come back to that, but let's just see what the American side thinks. Maybe not yet. So this is US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent I'm interested in, next to, thank you, Commerce Secretary hovering over Trump. This is not a trade agreement between Japan and the United States. This is not passing Congress, it's not a treaty. It can be torn up any time, and in fact, already Bessent has raised questions about if the trade deficit, US trade deficit towards Japan doesn't shrink, they'll be watching this quarter to quarter, probably likely to be undone. Next, please. What's more, the current US administration is already intervening in monetary policy in the United States. You know, there have been some talks about, comments from Bessent on intervening in Japanese monetary policy. Pretty slippery slope and raises all sorts of questions and risks, I think. Final slide, next slide, thanks. So what's Japan to do about this? Unlike the demographic structural challenge that requires a lot of work and to try to boost that fertility rate, which we saw is so difficult, there are some fairly technically easy and hopefully politically feasible things that Japan can do. I mean, Japan's production networks are centered in Asia. You know, 20% of exports are to the United States, but 80% of exports are to the rest of the world. That's pretty important. Japan imports a lot from the rest of the world. You know, Japan has played a leadership role in CPTPP, RCEP, all the trade governance that backs up and builds on the World Trade Organization. You know, this multilateral rules-based order, it's never worked perfectly, but it's been a source of confidence for economies to open up their markets. It's kept markets open for Japanese exports, and it's maintained, it's been the source of Japanese being able to secure supply of energy and food on the international market. So it's kept the global economy open for Japan. And that's a very big difference from the 1930s, where the whole global economy started to close up, and countries had to procure energy by other means. This system, the rules-based system, has allowed Japan to deepen trade and economic links with neighbors that, you know, Japan has political ups and downs with, some tensions from time to time, and a lack of trust. But this economic deepening has built trust and has constrained the politics. So you start to unravel the rules that provide confidence in this. It'll unravel interdependencies in East Asia that has economic but also political consequences. So very quickly, what should Japan do? Well, immediately, this preferential deal with the United States, Japan should just open that up and extend these concessions to the rest of the world. You know, if you're going to have to buy more Alaskan gas, more Japanese rice, the key is rice and agriculture. Why not buy more rice and agriculture from the rest of the world? Just multilateralize that preferential concession, and so you're back to most favored nation. That actually supports the rules-based system instead of weakens it. That sets an example too for the rest of the world, where other countries feel like they're needing to make deals with the United States to get out of the high tariffs and doing preferential deals. That, you know, it's in the country's interest to do so, but it weakens and erodes that system, and it takes you away from equal treatment, which is the fundamental principle of a rules-based system. So I'll end there, but thanks.
All right, thank you so much. Well, I'll just have a couple of comments and then open it up to questions from the audience. From what we heard from you, there are many challenges, but many opportunities as well here. For example, we just heard about opportunities for Japan to take a leadership role in the region, to diversify more in the face of uncertainties coming from US trade policy. This can be an opportunity to develop more interdependence and better relations with its neighbors. And in the face of the demographic challenges it faces, this may be a beneficial outcome. We also saw some of the challenges related to aging from Ippei's talk. And one thing about one thing has been that Japan has been struggling with deflation, as we all know. Now inflation is ticking up. That poses challenges because of the aging demographics, because there are all sorts of losers and winners coming from different monetary policy. And it's interesting how trading partners, the US, are actually trying to influence monetary policy, and that may have really important implications for different groups. So these are just my quick comments. Thank you so much, but I'll open up for questions now.
Questions, good. Yeah, down here, Nick. Sorry, I'm taking.
Thanks. Quick one for Shiro. Whilst it sounds appealing to multilateralize concessions to everyone else, surely Besant and Co would just go, no, this is a bilateral deal and whack and hunt. Wouldn't it just backfire?
It may. Yeah, I think you've got to make the calculation there. What's more important, protecting that 20% of your exports versus the 80% of your exports and the rest of the world, right? And so maybe Japan does not have to do that alone. You know, I think the first thing to recognize, it's in Japan's interest to open up to more agricultural imports from the rest of the world and become more competitive. I mean, Japanese rice is superior, in my view, and will be a good export, right? And you can have differential grades, as you already do, of Japanese rice, rice in Japan. So it's in Japan's interest. You know, it's the alliance and the US relationship that has to be managed versus Japan's interests in the broader multilateral system. Now, you know, that's a policy choice for Japan, but it's pretty obvious to me, and you wouldn't be alone in doing that. You'd be with India for starters, but more importantly, there are regional groupings, CPTPP, RCEP, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, where this sort of cooperation is being elevated. So there's likely going to be a leaders meeting for RCEP in October, and this is precisely to protect, you know, to signal and protect the multilateral system and East Asia's interests, because Japan's economic interests are really in East Asia, right? Next door, China, South Korea, but Southeast Asia as well. So, yeah, you know, there's a risk of the US retaliating. They might do something anyway. I mean, we're dealing with a fairly unreliable, unpredictable administration.
I'll add a couple questions there.
Thanks. In light of continued economic pressure from the US, has there been any conversation, concurrent with the kind of the negotiations about economic decoupling, and would that even work when it comes to the Japan-US economic relationship?
Yeah, no, I don't think there have been. That's not practical for Japan. Now, I think everyone's watching these statements in US trade policy of diverted trade, or trade from China coming through these other countries into the United States and threatening a 40% tariff. It's just a non-starter for Japan, and it's a non-starter if you recognize that these are production networks. And I should just, going back to Nick's question, this is where I think it's important for Japan and the rest of us to recognize that if we continue down this path of doing deals with the United States, we're not going to have a system left, and we are staring down a sort of world of trade diversion, of weaponized trade coercion big time, and it starts to look like the 1930s. And I'm not joking here. I mean, we're talking about contagion being rife, and Southeast Asia is being flooded by Chinese goods that can no longer get into the United States, and the temptation there is to put up walls, tariffs, and protect yourself from floods of Chinese goods. Now, the Southeast Asians have held firm, but that's where Japan and the rest of us have to work with Southeast Asia. And we need a system, we need to keep the system alive for the US to come back into when it's ready to. It might take a long time, but the alternative is just a breakdown in this system that has led to prosperity and security in the post-war period. So I'm not exaggerating here. I think this is an extremely dangerous point in time in history. And Japan's leadership is going to be crucial here, what Japan does.
Thank you. Jenna Lehman, ANU PhD candidate researching economic security. Thanks very much for the excellent presentation. I was interested in your views on Japan's use of industrial policy, particularly under its Economic Security Promotion Act, to secure supply chains and create its indispensable position in those and to protect its autonomy. So I was just interested in what are your thoughts on that, and particularly in the face of rising public debt? And I know, Shiro, you've written about this recently.
Okay. So industrial policy is sort of back in a big way in many countries. Most countries cannot afford it. And we're talking about direct subsidies and targeted subsidies, not, industrial policy in terms of making the business environment better, for example. And I think the most obvious part of this in Japan is the semiconductor subsidies. And they're huge. We're talking about, in percentage of GDP terms, bigger than what the United States is doing or has been doing, and in Europe, and maybe equivalent to what the Chinese are doing in targeted subsidies. It might work in Kumamoto, where you're bringing TSMC in to make legacy 7-nanometer chips, but Hokkaido and trying to make 2-nanometer chips with Rapidus and spending a huge amount of money on that, I see as extremely high risk. You're trying to leapfrog technologies, and you have to remember why Japan has fallen behind, not in equipment and materials in semiconductors. Japan has 50% of the global supply chain upstream. It's the chips, the making of the chips in these fabs where Japan has been overtaken by China, South Korea, and elsewhere. It's because of the US-Japan semiconductor agreement in 1985. So, yeah, to try to revive that with one shot with a huge amount of money, I'm not sure it can be afforded, and I think it's high risk. Yeah, it might work and it might pay off, but it is extremely high risk.
Yeah, and of course, according to the recent literature on industrial policies, compared to the previous generations, there are several papers are supporting the good thing about the industrial policies, but still, there are lots of uncertainty, because what is important for the industrial policy is that whether government can let the existing farm exiting from the market properly, So, and also there are lots of information problems. So now we feel like more and more supportive evidence is using causal inferences, but we are not quite sure. But coming back to the fiscal capacity, Japan definitely not in a good position. Thinking about the increase in the future expenditure, it must be very difficult to think about the massive industrial policy if it's really useful. Thank you.
I'll just jump right back in, sorry, quickly, on this new literature that shows some successes in South Korea and Japan earlier on, very careful causal studies. But there are other studies too that show the golden age of industrial policy in Japan, the MITI miracle, was a complete waste of money. All the money went to declining industries. Now, even there, I think you're in a rapid catch-up growth, export-led growth model is completely different from where you are now at the technological frontier, essentially. So it becomes much harder and much riskier to be deploying targeted subsidies. So I think the literature there hasn't quite made that distinction for me, where you've found these success stories in South Korea decades ago and trying to apply that now to Japan and other countries. Some big question marks, I think.
Just on the trade policy, foreign economic policy strategy for Japan. I wonder what it's actually like on the ground there in Japan. Is there any evidence that in its negotiations with the United States, Japan is articulating at the same time a strategy that will help to protect its interest in the international trading system or the international trade regime, which is so important to it and its neighbours? And supplementary to that, really, is there any evidence that there's a discussion, an active discussion of these issues, for example, between Australia and Japan about what the consequences are of the deals between its partners in the United States on the global trading system, and what we can collectively do together to insulate against the costs of it?
No, and not that I'm aware of, are the answers. I mean, I especially early on, worried about the Japanese response. I talked to as many people as I could, and when I raised questions about what about the rest of the world, it's like, well, that's tomorrow's problem. We've got to deal with the Americans first. And I think it's still being pushed back to tomorrow's problem from what I can see. Now, I think there were some useful lines drawn in Parliament in the Diet in response to the opposition, not to give up too much. And there was that letter to Xi Jinping, recognition. And then in terms of discussions between Australia and Japan on the consequences, I'm not that I'm aware of, but one would hope there's something going on. It'd be nice to have something like that a bit more in public if there is. Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah, thanks very much. Simon Avenel, ANU Japan Institute Interim Director. So I have a question for Ippei about the demographic images that you showed us. I'm really interested in the discourse on old people as a problem. So how do we define old people? Who are they? And they've been a problem in Japan for a long time. Since at least the 1970s, there was an old person's problem that gradually morphed into an aging society problem over time. I'm just wondering, do policymakers in Japan, economists, people like you, think about the possibility of redefining what an old person is? And I think we heard in the previous presentation that old people are actually, advanced age people are actually healthier and able to be more productive for longer. So I'm just wondering, are there policymakers who think about redefining what the meaning of being old is in terms of being a productive worker in the economy?
I would like to, ask Sagiri to answer first. Yeah, if you have any views on that.
It's too late.
What do you mean, once you get past a particular age?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And true that maybe the current people at the age of 60s, like age of 50, like 20 years ago, 20 years ago or something. So that there are more and more healthy older people, and we need to think about how to utilize these people in the workforces. But but still that there are lots of companies are still maintaining a lifetime employment system. So that if you want to stay in a farm, you need to climb up the ladder. And once you cannot be in a position for forever. So that in order to fully utilize the healthy older people, we need to at the same time have a really big structural reform for the labor markets and the companies' employment strategy. Thank you very much.
All right. Well, we could talk about these topics for a very long time, and then I have a million questions for the panelists, but I think we should wrap it up, and we have lunch coming up. So thank you so much, Ippei and Shiro.